you can. A little easier for me.
We would try.
My old brain doesn't work. So like many devotees, I saw Prabhupada only occasionally. I'm a latecomer. I'm not one of the early disciples of Prabhupada. Probably should say a little something about myself. I was 23 years old when I came to Krishna consciousness. I had just been commissioned a lieutenant in the Air Force about a year before. I graduated from the United States Air Force Academy. So I was supposed to serve 5 years as an officer in the Air Force. But I met the Hare Krishnas. That didn't happen. Somehow Krishna got me out. It was supposed to be impossible for me not to serve those 5 years, but I ended up serving only about a year and a half. And I got an honorable discharge, so that worked out well. So I was living in Sacramento, California, in the Air Force, on the Air Force base. And I was out one day, and someone gave me a stick of incense, asked for a donation. I gave 25 cents, and was given a Reservoir of Pleasure. I think you know Reservoir of Pleasure, that book? Pamphlet. Small pamphlet called Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure. It's actually a transcript of a couple of Prabhupada's lectures mixed together, put together. So I read that. It has a picture of Krishna on the cover and Prabhupada on the back. And I reviewed that Reservoir of Pleasure, often looking at it, thinking, what was I thinking when I read this all those years ago? And Prabhupada begins by talking. He doesn't say who Krishna is. He begins by saying, Krishna, this sound is transcendental. So I didn't know he was talking about the person on the front of the book. So I don't know really what I understood, but I read the whole thing one night. And it said that they had temples that you could go to. It said every Sunday we had a feast, so you're invited to come. So I drove a couple of hours from Sacramento to San Francisco. And I got there, I didn't know what time the feast started, so I got there around noon. And the feast didn't start until 5 o'clock. So they didn't quite know what to do with me, so they sent me over to one of the devotee's house. Some of you may know him, Keshava Bharati Swami, who was Keshava Bharati Das Adhikari at that time. He was usually at the airport distributing books, but that day he was homesick, which was my good fortune. So I got to spend the whole afternoon with Keshava Bharati, and other devotees were coming by. And I was just inquisitive and was asking questions. And one thing I kept hearing, I wasn't quite sure what they were saying. They were talking about this person called Prabhupada. That's what I heard. They said, Prabhupada says this, Prabhupada says this, Prabhupada says that. That's what it sounded like to me. I didn't realize that was the person on the back of it, what written or spoken, what I just read last night. It took a little while for me to sink in. But one thing that impressed me right away was how dedicated these people were. They only had one thing on their mind. They were so dedicated. It was very inspiring to me, just to see their dedication. And actually what happened, I very quickly took to Krishna consciousness. Even though before I came to Krishna consciousness, I had really practically no inclination toward spirit. I mean, I was raised in a religious family, but I had rejected that in Christianity. And I wasn't a long-time seeker like many devotees are. They become vegetarians when they're 13 years old or something, and they go to this ashram and that ashram, but I didn't. I came from being just a hardcore American mudha. And then I met the devotees, but instantly, practically, they made so much sense. I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to try this. So I'm still trying. And so fortunately, when I first went to the temple, it was in June of 1974 in San Francisco. So Prabhupada, you all know that the first Rath Yatras were San Francisco Rath Yatra. And in the early days, it was the only Rath Yatra, was San Francisco. So Prabhupada was coming for the 1974 San Francisco Rath Yatra. So I came to the temple just a couple of weeks before he came. So I was able to see him very soon after I had come to Krishna consciousness. Now I didn't see him when he arrived for that, because I was preparing his room. Most of the devotees went to the airport for his arrival. And some, I was a new devotee, so I guess I didn't get that privilege. I was just brand new, walked in the door practically. So I was preparing the rooms where Prabhupada was going to stay. Some devotees' apartments being turned into a place for Prabhupada. A little funny aside here. Wherever Prabhupada, I heard this story later, because one of the things we did to prepare his rooms was painting, put new paint. So Prabhupada would sometimes say, "Why is it everywhere I go it smells like paint?" Because the devotees tried to make it nice for Prabhupada. It always smelled like fresh paint. So that happened there too. We prepared a little garden for him out in the back. So anyway, the next day at the temple, San Francisco temple, Prabhupada arrived. So we were all waiting for Prabhupada in the temple room. And just before Prabhupada arrived, actually, the GBC at that time, Jai Tirtha, he made an announcement, because I wasn't there at the airport, but I heard a little something. What had happened at the airport was that Prabhupada was expected to come through one gate, which was one like alley, one hallway, but he actually ended up coming in a different place. So all the devotees, they were waiting and waiting, and Prabhupada wasn't coming here. So then they heard where he was actually coming. So it was just a stampede. Everyone just jumping over chairs and knocking over people. So the next morning, Prabhu at the temple, he said, "We kind of overdid it last night, maybe." And one thing he said that always struck in my mind, he said, "We have to be very careful around Srila Prabhupada, because he's the most precious living entity in the universe." So that always struck me, that characterization of Prabhupada is precious. What is precious means something that's very rare and very valuable. So what was more rare or valuable than Srila Prabhupada? No one was. Now my first darshan of Prabhupada, of course, he came in the temple. As soon as Prabhupada comes in, everybody offers obeisances. So I had my head on the floor, and then I looked up a little bit, and I saw these rust-colored socks walking by. I saw Prabhupada's lotus feet first. Then he spoke, although I don't remember anything that he said. And of course, then he went to a Rath Yatra, the Rath Yatra festival. At that time, it was still kind of the hippie era, a little bit. So people were attracted to flowers and colorful things and so on, festivals. So a lot of people attended that festival in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And Srila Prabhupada spoke. And of course he led kirtan, and he was there. Prabhupada would always sit on Subhadra's cart, the middle cart. And these carts, by the way, of course you all know who H.G.Nagraj Prabhu is. H.G.Nagraj Prabhu dedicated his life to putting on Rath Yatra and building these carts. Now I also, after H.G.Nagraj Prabhu left San Francisco in '75, after the Rath Yatra, and joined the Radha Damodar party, and I spent a few years working on Rath Yatras myself. But in 1975, these carts, he would build them from scratch, he and whatever crew he could pull together. And they were very, very big. And they had these huge wheels, huge wooden wheels. I don't know how tall they were, 7, 8 feet. And they weighed so much. It would take, just to try to get them, put them up on the cart to assemble it, it would take like 5 men just to lift them up and get them up there. So H.G.Nagraj Prabhu was thinking, how can we make an improvement to this? So he had an idea was to make spoke wheels, metal spoke wheels. And in the San Francisco temple, that temple at that time it had been a mortuary, a funeral home. So it had a big garage on the side where they would park the hearses. The hearses where they carried the dead bodies. So that big garage was there, and he used to work in there. In fact, he would sleep in there. He had a little loft, he would sleep in there. So he found some person, I don't know where the person came from. Krishna just sent him. He knew how to weld, so for quite some months, this person was welding these wheels together. So So H.G.Nagraj Prabhu wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada telling him that he had designed these new wheels. He thought they would be much better for the festival. And Prabhupada was skeptical. He wrote back and said, I don't know the exact wording, but the gist of it was, I'm a little concerned about these wheels. So what happened was those wheels were put on the new carts in 1975 when Srila Prabhupada came for Rath Yatra. And the carts, actually only Jagannath's and Balaram's carts had the new wheels, the spoked wheels. And Subhadra's cart that Prabhupada was riding on, they still had the old wooden wheels. But what happened to the new wheels, the weight of the chariots was too much. And between each spoke, they flattened out. So the whole way, that's how Jagannath and Balaram had to ride in that parade. And Prabhupada's cart was smooth. Prabhupada had a smooth ride. But after that, H.G.Nagraj Prabhu, he improved his design. And now most carts everywhere, they have spoked wheels, but they're reinforced so they won't break like that. So anyway, so Prabhupada came to San Francisco in 1974, and he came again in 1975. There's a little story involved in that I am somewhat involved in. I was more or less the temple commander, although I didn't have that title yet, but I was helping prepare. At that time, we had moved from San Francisco across the bay to Berkeley. You may have heard of the University of California in Berkeley. It's quite a lot went on there in the 60s, riots and things. So the temple is now in Berkeley. It's across the San Francisco Bay from San Francisco. So we were moving the temple. We had bought the place in the beginning of 75, and Prabhupada was coming in June or July of 75. I think it was July that year. So I was helping to prepare the temple, getting everything ready for Prabhupada coming. And one of the things I noticed as we were preparing, we had a beautiful new vyasa for Srila Prabhupada. And we knew that Prabhupada liked to play the gong, and we had a gong for him, but there wasn't anything for Prabhupada to hit the gong with. So there was one young man who was just coming to the temple sometimes, and he was helping me out. And he said, I have an idea. I have a xylophone hammer. Now, I don't know if you know what a xylophone is, but you hit it. It's like a little ball at the end of a stick, so it's a xylophone. So he said, I have a xylophone hammer or mallet, whatever they call it, so we can use that. So we brought that and we put it on Prabhupada's vyasa to use with his gong. The problem is this xylophone hammer is made of hard rubber. So the big reception for Srila Prabhupada is coming from the airport. He's sitting down. The big kirtan is there. Vishnu Jang Swami is there leading the kirtan. And at one point, Prabhupada picks up his gong and he starts hitting it with this. And it doesn't like the sound. It's just dead. It just makes a dead sound. So after about 3 or 4 beats, Prabhupada just puts it down. I'm thinking, oh no, this is horrible. What am I going to do? So I'm running around. I got to find something for Prabhupada to play his gong with. So I ran downstairs. The pujari room was under the deity room. And I was just looking for anything. And what I found was this old wrench. It's actually a bicycle wrench, which is like a flat wrench. It has 4 different grooves on it. And I said, and it was old and black. I know how metal gets when it gets old. So I said, I can't give this to Prabhupada like this. But somehow, this shows the mood of the vote. We just wanted to serve Prabhupada. We didn't always know how to do it. So I said, so what I did, I looked around, I found a little piece of ribbon, and I tied a ribbon around the wrench. And I brought it upstairs, and another devotee, H.G.Nagraj Prabhu, he took it and he gave it to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada picked it up, and he started playing, and he hit it just a few times. And he put that down. So then H.G.Nagraj Prabhu got an idea. He ran into the kitchen, and he got an ice cream scoop, which is, it has round. So then Prabhupada played with it, actually. They gave it to Prabhupada, and he played. Unfortunately, I don't think there are any pictures of this. Vishaka was taking pictures of Prabhupada at that time, but she didn't get any pictures of that. But of course, after that, we thought, we have to get Prabhupada a real hammer. So the head pujari and I, we went to the local hardware store, Berkeley hardware store, and we bought a nice hammer. It's actually called a miner's hammer for mining, chipping away. And we painted it gold and made it look nice. And we put that on Prabhupada's vyasa. And there's a picture of Prabhupada playing the gong with that hammer. at the Rath Yatra in 1975. It's on the back of one of the Chaitanya Charitamritas, or at least it used to be. So it was so nice because Prabhupada was, he didn't like it, but he didn't have any qualms about, which in some case you might think, well, this is really silly, playing such a distinguished person, obviously. He's using an ice cream scoop to play his gong. But Prabhupada did it. So then, of course, Prabhupada stayed there. He stayed there for like a week or two. One thing happened during that time also was Prabhupada was staying in the temple in Berkeley. And we weren't legally allowed to have anybody reside in the temple, except maybe one custodian or something like that. So Prabhupada wasn't actually supposed to be living in the temple. And there was a big controversy in the neighborhood, actually. But people in the neighborhood didn't like the Hare Krishnas so much. They even started, the street that the temple is on is called Stewart Street. So they actually started a group called Neighbors on Stewart Street. And the whole purpose of that group was to basically get the Hare Krishnas out of there. So anyway, there was one man who was the head of that group who really didn't like us. And when Prabhupada was in his room, he came snooping around the temple, this man. We actually had guards out at night, but somehow he got by, and he was trying to peek. So anyway, Prabhupada, the recorded lectures of Prabhupada during that time, he was speaking on the Jamil section of Srimad Bhagavatam. And he, of course, had morning walks. I went on one morning walk with Srila Prabhupada, which, of course, was very nice. We walked on the campus of the University of Berkeley. And then I saw Prabhupada again a year later. He didn't come to San Francisco, but he came to Los Angeles, which is just a few hours drive down the road. So we went down there. What I remember about that, I was there for the airport reception, which of course was ecstatic. There's some nice pictures of that also. H.G.Nagraj Prabhu was holding the umbrella over Srila Prabhupada. We were walking through the airport. Things were quite different then, actually. Devotees would kind of just take over the airport. Huge kirtans going on. Prabhupada would be just blissful and smiling. But one thing I remember is that when he got to the temple, Prabhupada gave a little talk, but before he spoke, he sang Parama Karuna. He sang that song, Parama Karuna. It was very nice. In fact, when Prabhupada traveled to other places that summer of 1975, he also sang that song. And sometimes he would become overwhelmed in ecstasy. I know in Miami and in Atlanta also came all choked up. Because Prabhupada was seeing, look at the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. How when Prabhupada came to America, he didn't know what was going to happen. And just a few short years later, so many devotees are coming, he's initiating so many devotees. And he saw it as just the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on these lunches. What were we? had no qualification to receive Srila Prabhupada, to receive his mercy. So Prabhupada was, he was singing that song regularly. You could see he was deeply into that meditation. So we spent some time with Prabhupada hearing his classes also. One class I remember, I didn't know what point Prabhupada was making actually. He kept making this point about, he said, everywhere you will find the days of the week are Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Sunday, Monday. Sunday comes before Monday. And I didn't know what he was talking about, why he was saying that, somehow the context. What Prabhupada was talking about in the Bhagavatam, maybe he was translating that section of the Bhagavatam at that time, where it says that the sun is closer than the moon. And we know that it's closer above Mandala, that's really what it's about. What Prabhupada was saying, this is an indication that the sun is closer than the moon, because everywhere you will find Sunday, Monday. But I don't think he explained there, at least I missed it. I didn't really know what he was talking about. Why he kept saying that, making that point. So anyways, of course, it was always nice to be there in Prabhupada's presence and offer Guru Puja to him directly. And I got to fan Srila Prabhupada a few times. I was going to say, at that time in America, this thing was going on, the deprogramming, the anti-cult movement. So one devotee told me he went to one of those anti-cult meetings somewhere. He said they were showing some slides, and there was a slide of me fanning Srila Prabhupada. And I never saw that picture. I guess I would have to join the anti-cult movement in order to see it. So in 1976, I was allowed to go as a young brahmachari. I was allowed to go to the Mayapur Vrindavan Festival. So at the Mayapur Vrindavan Festival, Prabhupada spoke every day. He was speaking on Prahlad's prayers. Prabhupada loved that section, that chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, chapter 9. There's one day he was sitting in a room with devotees. He said, just see how wonderful Prahlad Maharaj, this young boy, how he is speaking this wonderful philosophy of the Lord Nrsimhadev. He was appreciating it so much. One thing it surprised me, I was always, in the beginning, as a brahmachari, I was always learning shlokas. So one of the shlokas that I learned is from the 9th canto, the 9th chapter, Channa Kalo Yadabhavastu Tuyugo Dasattam, which says that in Kali Yuga, the Lord appears in a hidden incarnation, the Channa avatar, which our acharyas take as an indication of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we were just going on with the prayers of Prahlad day by day, and then on Gaur Purnima, that verse came up, and I thought, wow, what a coincidence. But I don't think it was a coincidence. I'm pretty sure it was planned that way. And we were working our way up, so that verse would be spoken on Gaur Purnima day. So Prabhupada spoke on that verse, of course, gave a wonderful lecture. And then the group of devotees that I was with, we split up because first there was the Mayapur section and then the Vrindavan section. So from Mayapur, Prabhupada was going to Vrindavan, but he wasn't going directly to Vrindavan. Some of the devotees that I was with, half the group was going to Jagannath Puri. They wanted to see Puri, and also the temple I was from was New Jagannath Puri, San Francisco temple. So they wanted to buy Jagannath-related paraphernalia, wall hangings and things, decorative art from Marissa and so on. So one group went there, and another group, we were able to travel with Srila Prabhupada because Prabhupada was going on a tour between the two festivals, basically around the Vrindavan area. There was a Vrindavan Pandal at that March or April, I guess it was March 1976, before the Vrindavan Festival. And Prabhupada held programs in other places too. So there were, I think, 2 buses full of devotees accompanying Srila Prabhupada to all these different engagements, and I was on one of those buses. So that was nice. I get to see him in the Pandal. I get to see him in smaller engagements also. One of the engagements I remember was in the place called Modi Nagar. And the Modi, of course, is a big industrial family in India, and the whole town is basically their town. That's why it's called Modi Nagar. It has factories there for building their products. They have a big Lakshmi Narayan temple there. When we arrived there, we were waiting for Srila Prabhupada. We got there before he did. When Prabhupada arrived, they had the local band, I don't know, city band, high school band or something. So they greeted Srila Prabhupada. The band was there with all their instruments greeting Srila Prabhupada when he arrived. Then we went into the temple, and Srila Prabhupada sat down to chant Jai Radha Madhava and give a little talk. But Prabhupada didn't have any kartals to play. So his servant said, anybody have any kartals? And I always had kartals with me. So I had my kartals. But the strings on they were white and dirty, and I thought, well, I can't get these to Prabhupada to play. So I didn't do it. And I always wondered, should I have let Prabhupada play on the dirty string kartals that I would treasure and kept forever? I didn't think it was right to get those Prabhupada might use the kartals. So anyway, and then actually Prabhupada spoke. That was basically, he was just speaking to the devotees when he arrived. Then in the evening, he gave a talk there to the townspeople, a public talk. And one thing that always struck in my mind then was, at the end of his talk, Srila Prabhupada, he did the Prema Dhwani prayers, Jayam Vishnupada Paramahamsa. And then at one point he said, Modi family ki jai. And I was always used to everybody saying, not throwing in extra things. There was a certain way that you always said it. But Srila Prabhupada said, Modi family ki jai. So And he was appreciating them and giving them his blessing, which of course was very nice. So that, I think that must have been during that time, that was the last times that I saw Prabhupada. Of course, we saw him a lot because he was giving class every day. And he was coming every morning. Just like now, it's nice, we have the tradition here in this temple to bring Srila Prabhupada from his samadhi into the temple. So of course, Prabhupada would go on his morning walk, and he would come. Now, one thing I remember is that when Srila Prabhupada arrived, there weren't always a lot of devotees to see him. And I attributed it to two things. One is that maybe we were just used to seeing Prabhupada so much, and a lot of devotees were thinking, well, I'll just go to class. Here, I don't have to be there when Prabhupada arrives, I'll just go to class. And part of the reason devotees may have been thinking that was in the early days, everybody got sick, right? I mean, I myself had dysentery. Lots of devotees, especially in Mayapur. And the Mayapur was very austere at that time. The buildings weren't finished, devotees were sleeping on concrete, on the open walls, there was nothing. That's how we were living. And the water was from a pump and a well, and sometimes the water wasn't pure, so many devotees were very sick. So I think that's probably one reason why not big crowds of devotees were there. So one thing about it was I had been sick in Mayapur, so I'd recovered by that time. So I would go and meet Prabhupada when he came back, and you could actually walk pretty close to Prabhupada, which was a rare thing because usually he was surrounded by all the big shots. And I was just a rank and file devotee, but I was able to actually get really close to Srila Prabhupada because of that. So then, of course, we moved back to America, and we didn't see Prabhupada. I didn't see him. He didn't visit in '77. And then we had the time when Prabhupada was preparing to leave his body, which was such an intense period. In our Krishna consciousness, we were always, in those days, Prabhupada had a big movement, had many disciples, and we were always discouraged from writing to Prabhupada. In fact, Prabhupada himself, he wanted his leaders to deal with everything, basically. He wanted to be able to translate his books, and he wanted his leaders to deal with devotees' problems, the managing ISKCON. So at least that was what the sense that I had, and most of the devotees in the temple, they didn't just write letters to Srila Prabhupada. They would ask, and Prabhupada would say, if you have any questions, you ask your temple president or your GBC or senior devotees. So I had never written a letter to Srila Prabhupada. But the only one letter I wrote, actually everyone in the temple each wrote a letter because we were begging Srila Prabhupada to stay with us. That's what the letter was. The temple president, had us all one day during Bhagavatam class, basically. We all wrote letters to Srila Prabhupada. And it was such an emotional time because the communication wasn't very quick in those days. Someone would call maybe once in a while to America, and then one person in the word would get spread here and there, and we would get news. Maybe Prabhupada's servant or secretary would call at GBC, and then our temple president would hear from him, and then we would hear something. So it seemed like we knew that there was something going on, that Prabhupada had said something like, Krishna has given me the choice whether to stay or not. And then we heard that Prabhupada said he was going to stay. So we were all so jubilant. Oh, Prabhupada's going to stay now. He's going to stay with us. Because we all had this feeling that Prabhupada can stay at 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, whatever he wants. He can stay as long as he wants. He's Krishna's man. He never has to die if he doesn't want to. We kind of had that sentiment, that mood. Nothing was impossible for Prabhupada. But then it seemed like it's almost as soon as we felt that relief, then we heard it was a week later, we heard Prabhupada's passed away. It was such a shock. At that time, I had a Gurukul ashram. I had just a small group of boys I was teaching Gurukul ashram. So I had to, present the news to them and so on. Go on. We all had to go on. We all had to press on. It was a very shocking thing. And the devotees took it in different ways. My wife always tells me she was always, as soon as she heard that, she was very afraid of the future of the movement. So what are we going to do without Prabhupada as the head of the movement, leader of the movement? That thought didn't occur to me. In fact, I was even thinking that, well, we always lived in separation from Prabhupada our whole lives in Krishna consciousness, most of us. So this is just a continuation of that. I was thinking more intellectually than from the heart, I think. And because I was thinking, well, whether Prabhupada is in India or he's in Goloka Vrindavan, I'm not seeing him in either case. So devotees have different reactions. I remember I did at one point get quite emotional. One of the Gurukula boys, he didn't want to chant. I was always trying to get the boys to sing. So in Prabhupada's Guru Puja, he wasn't singing, and I got very upset with him. And he said, well, why should we sing? He's dead now. And he was a 6-year-old boy. So he had some emotion too, obviously. That's the way he was reacting to it. He must have been feeling what was going on, but he couldn't really understand how to deal with it. So he just kind of came out like that. Then I was, oh, you can't say that. So it was a very emotionally troubling time. And of course, the movement went through a lot of things. But of course, Prabhupada's mercy is powerful, and he's still with us. We've seen he didn't give up on us, despite all our insanity. And there's been plenty of it, believe me. I saw plenty firsthand in those early days after Prabhupada. Lots of crazy things went on. It's amazing, actually, that the movement went on, but it did, only by Prabhupada's mercy. Krishna reciprocating, really. Krishna reciprocating with Krishna's desire, with Prabhupada's desire. Because Prabhupada gave so much, gave everything to push on, to start this movement, to do what no one else would do or could do, go to such a horrible place as the West and do what he did, then all over the world. Because Prabhupada's desire was so strong and so pure, and Krishna kept it going. What Prabhupada had started, it's only by Krishna's mercy that it's gone on and continues to go on. So as you all know, we're all eternally indebted to Srila Prabhupada. And we always like to learn more about him. The more we learn about him and see and hear how devotees appreciated him and continue to appreciate him, to strengthen our own faith, and that, of course, that's foundation or advancement in Krishna consciousness. So I'll stop. Does anybody like to ask anything?
Any questions?
Class time is basically over. Yeah?
Could you tell, please, about your activities, blessing of Prabhupada, and did he give to you like order what to do, like blessing what to do in your activity, or you made your activity, your service by blessing of your god brothers and?
Yeah, my service is back to Godhead. Of course, I always think of it as Prabhupada's magazine. In fact, we try to market, advertise, promote BTG. And we used to have an ad in BTG that said, Srila Prabhupada's favorite magazine. So, of course it is Prabhupada's favorite magazine. But actually the way BTG works, it kind of works according to what Prabhupada wanted. He wrote letters, actually. Of course, the movement was much smaller when Prabhupada was really promoting BTG, where BTG was so central to the preaching of ISKCON. But he said all devotees should write for the magazine. He just wanted devotees to study his books and then write articles for BTG. So that's really the way it happens. I really don't make anything happen. Krishna sends the articles. He's inspiring the devotees. The Prabhupada is inspiring the devotees to write, and they send them in. And somehow we always get enough. We get enough good articles. It's interesting. Last year or a couple of years ago, I need something like 50 or 60 articles a year to fill up the magazine, to come from everywhere that are suitable. And I always keep a log of what comes in, and do we accept it or not, and so on. And I looked through a log of 1 year, and we got something like 120 submissions, and 60 of them were usable. So we got we got just what we needed, basically, to fill the magazine. So that tends to be the way that it works. Devotees are inspired on their own, and I don't do anything. I just process what comes in. I try to make it more. I'm an editor. I'm not much of a writer myself. I say other people create, I destroy. At least I destroy what's not so good in their writing. And that's kind of the way it goes on. We have a group of 5 devotees, all senior devotees, who review every submission that comes in. They make comments, and then ultimately I make the decision of what's going to be published. And one unfortunate thing about me, I'd like to encourage anyone who'd like to write, if you go on Krishna.com, there's a BTG section, and there you can see how to write. There's writer's guidelines for Back to Godhead. And one problem in this digital age is that it takes a long time to see it in print. If you write something now, it may be a year before you actually see it in the magazine. Whereas if you write for dandavats.com, you'll see it tomorrow. So that's a little bit of a challenge in inspiring devotees to write for BTG, because that's just the nature of how it works. One thing is we print in South Africa because South Africa buys more magazines than everybody else. So it's the most economical to do it that way. And then the magazines are shipped by sea to America, and from America they're distributed all over the world. So right now I'm editing the September-October issue of Back to God, and the May-June issue just got printed. And July-August issue is in layout right now, so it's quite an extended schedule that we have. I think that's a little something about how it works. All right. Oh, something else? Okay.
Yeah. From spiritual masters, I heard that when one of them, maybe it was like Srimad Bhagavatam class, and one of spiritual masters described when he met first time Prabhupada. It was so mystical, like he heard some bells from somewhere, from transcendental bells. Then he sees Chinese, and from another spiritual master I also heard that when he fell down in Dandavat and see, like you described, on the piece of lotus feet or rock art, he feel this bhava. He feel this bhava, and now he is very strong spiritual master. And I'm waiting when you describe you see the socks of Srila, but I'm waiting also for some.
You're waiting for me to say his feet weren't touching the floor, right?
Yeah.
I often tell people I don't have a mystical bone in my body. I haven't had a mystical experience. A lot of devotees, they do. I mean, devotees say they saw Prabhupada and he was just glowing. And so people see differently. People have different kinds of perceptions. I don't tend to see things in that way myself. I tend to see things, they seem to be part of this material world. So, of course, I was impressed with Prabhupada. I guess you might say I saw Prabhupada with my ears. I took to heart what he said and was inspired by his speaking. But I didn't have those kinds of mystical experiences, you might say. Some devotees did, some devotees didn't.
Maybe later when Prabhupada passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe later you have, maybe until now.
It's never too late.
Never
too late.
Yeah.
That's right. Someday. Yes.
Could you tell please about Srila Prabhupada's mood? What did you felt, especially you from him?
What mood did I feel from Prabhupada? Always a sense of urgency. And of course you can always hear it on his lectures too. One thing I always note on Prabhupada's lectures is that, well, a couple of things. One is, actually it's what our whole movement is about. Janma sarthaka koti karapara upakara. Manusya janma hoila janma. That verse Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, in human life, you have to make your own life perfect and then preach to others, try to help others. So these two things especially came out in Prabhupada's lectures over and over and over again. Even in the earliest days, I like to listen to Srila Prabhupada's New York and San Francisco, the earliest lectures. I like it because he's like a teacher. He's just speaking the philosophy like a teacher. And I just like that kind of thing myself. And about one thing sometimes I think in his Prabhupada's later lectures, it's always preach, preach, preach. So I think if I listen in New York, maybe it's not going to do that so much. But you hear it right practically from day one. It's quite interesting. People don't even know who Krishna is, and he's telling them to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. Practically as soon as they walk in the door. So that, be very serious, take this serious, don't waste this human form of life, don't waste a moment. 24 hours a day, be engaged in Krishna's service. That was Prabhupada's message, and he spoke it so urgently all the time. And also preach, these two things. These were the core of his message. Become Krishna conscious yourself and make others Krishna conscious. So that's, you could say, overall, when all the things Prabhupada said, that's what permeates everything, all of Prabhupada's speaking. Yeah. And of course, Prabhupada's conviction. Whatever people asked him, there was no question that he was right. In fact, sometimes I know it's nice that everything Prabhupada did was perfect, that's fine. We're disciples of Prabhupada. But I sometimes, when I listen to Prabhupada sometimes speaking in room conversations, I have to admit myself, I sometimes feel a little uncomfortable. Because I know that the people, they're sometimes uncomfortable. Because Prabhupada was so insistent about what he spoke. He wasn't interested in hearing what they had to say. I interviewed Professor O'Connell. One of the things I did was I was one of the interviewers for Prabhupada Lilamrita. I came in towards the end, and I interviewed some of the devotees who had a lot of association. But I interviewed Professor Joseph O'Connell, who had some association with Prabhupada from the University of Toronto. And one of the things he said is kind of criticism of Prabhupada, I'll just tell you. He said, I didn't see him as an ideal spiritual person because he wouldn't listen to anybody else's opinion. Basically. So some people didn't like that. It made them uncomfortable. But that's the way Prabhupada was. He was uncompromising. If they said nonsense, then he wouldn't accept it. One thing Prabhupada would often say, because Prabhupada, in these conversations always, he was very personal with people and very direct with them. And sometimes he would be pursuing, explaining at a certain point that he was trying to make. Then a person they have their notes and they want to go on to the next question. So, here's my question number 2. And they probably say, no. Do you understand? Do you understand what I'm telling you? Don't go on to your next question. You understand? Are you having problems? What do you think? What is your opinion of this? So that also probably he was trying to make his points, and he insisted that, of course, he insisted that Krishna was right, and he was only presenting it. How can you, that was also Prabhupada's move. Well, how can you doubt this? Krishna said it. Krishna said it. Obviously, it's the absolute truth. Why can't anyone accept that? Why can't everyone accept that? So it was just obvious to Srila Prabhupada that this was the truth. So why can't you accept it? Krishna said it. I'm not making it up. Krishna's saying it. So you have to accept it. If you're an honest person. So that's also, of course, Prabhupada was so powerful. He didn't budge. No one was going to change his opinion, obviously. Yes?
What did you feel and think when you saw Prabhupada for the very first time? What were your feelings?
Well, I think because I was so new, I wasn't yet at the stage where I was. Like many devotees, they were so eager to see Srila Prabhupada. And at that time, I was more into studying the Bhagavad Gita. Even though I was reading it, it was coming from Prabhupada. But Prabhupada as the person wasn't that much. Now, a lot of devotees became devotees only because of the allure, you might say, the magnetism of Srila Prabhupada. But I can't say that that was the first thing that attracted me. So I think I was more, my feeling for Prabhupada was more to hear what he had to say. Of course, I was also in some ways swept up. I was a very new person, and I was only around for a couple of weeks. So in some ways I was still swept up into that, but I wasn't quite there yet where the other devotees were when I first saw Srila Prabhupada. One thing that is quite a coincidence was, as soon as I met the devotees, then I wanted to be a brahmachari right away. I thought I wanted to move into the ashram. I started I changed 16 rounds practically the first week after I went to the temple. And then immediately I wanted to get out of the Air Force and move into the ashram. But as I said, I was supposed to serve 5 years, and I'd only served about 1 year. So it's a kind of a long story, how it all unfolded, how I finally got out. But what really got it ball rolling was when I went to the Rath Yatra, the orders were selling different things, and they were selling neck beads. So I bought neck beads and I put on neck beads. And I went to the work, on base where I worked, the military base, in my uniform, officer's uniform, with neck beads on. And that was, you can't wear those. That's against regulations. You can't wear those. And at that time already I was pretty convinced and pretty rebellious, you might say, I guess. I wanted to get out of there somehow or other. I wanted to get out. So I said, no, I have to wear these. This is my religion. According to my religion, I have to wear these. And they have to show, too. So this started the whole ball rolling. I had to see chaplains and lawyers and this person and that person. And actually, when I went to see the lawyers, they wanted to see if I was actually serious about this religion, or I was just trying an excuse to get out. So I brought a nectar devotion to me with the lawyers, and the lawyers would give me a nectar devotion. And it mentions in there that if you wear neck beads, it keeps the Yamadutas stay away. So I was explaining to the lawyer, I have to wear these. I explained to them who the Yamadutas were. So it took about 6 months, and finally they let me out. H.G.Nagraj Prabhu actually came and picked me up from the Air Force Base and took me away.
Can you talk a little bit about Jayananda?
H.G.Nagraj Prabhu. That's a wonderful devotee. The first time I went to the temple, he wasn't there, he was traveling, because H.G.Nagraj Prabhu was do anything devotee. Whatever had to be done, he would do it. So the temple always needed money back in those days. Temples always needed money. I was a temple treasurer for a while, and I knew don't have money to pay bills, so much anxiety. So he was out, he would sell incense to, they used to be called head shops. Head shops means they sold drug paraphernalia, and but incense and different things, so hippie stores. So he traveled around the western states of the United States. He had a route that he would go to. So he was out on his route. So I didn't meet him the first time, but I kept hearing people talk about this person, Jayananda. So when I came the second week, he was there. And the temple president, I was, if I can say this kind of in humility, I was a bit of a catch, you might say, to the devotees. Because, you know, there were a lot of people coming off the street who were kind of dirty. But here I was, this polished gentleman. I was an officer of the Air Force, you know. So they were kind of glad that I was becoming a devotee. So when I came to the temple, they wanted to introduce me to Jayananda. So they had been talking about it. And, you know, I had a certain picture in my mind of this person. When I met the devotees, some of them, they were so effulgent, they were so freshly shaven. And there's a devotee there, H.G.Nagraj, who was quite a handsome man. He was cleanly shaven, he was all tan, he had just come from India. He led this fired up kirtan, he gave a nice class. And he was wearing, I took prasadam with him, he was wearing a garland on his ear. It was also cool, you know, it was kind of cool. So I kind of had this picture of Jayananda would be. So I walked in and he introduced me to him. There's this tall man, he's wearing this regular Western shirt and work jeans on, and had grease all over them, you know. And a lot of devotees were doing, you know, Hari Bol. He said, "Hi, how you doing?" Or Hare Krishna. He shook my hand, Hare Krishna. So that was my introduction. But I got to work with him because they always needed help, and he was building Rath Yatra cars, just still working on them. So I was recruited to work with him. So right away, I got quite a bit of his association. And he was just very humble, but very also such a hard worker. Back in those days, he would often live at the Rath Yatra site, just sleep over there. And he'd be dependent on the temple, because the temple was, especially in 75, but even in 74 it was a little closer, because it was the Rath Yatra cars would be put together somewhere in San Francisco in some vacant lot. And he would stay there, live there, sometimes for months. And he would just grab people off the street practically and say, hey, can you help us out here? And some of those people became devotees just because of Jayananda Prabhu. He had a very magnetic personality, and it was always a challenge because people working, they get hungry. And a lot of times the prasadam wouldn't come on time. So the workers start getting a little grouchy and not uncooperative and so on. So Jayananda Prabhu's solution was bananas and buttermilk. He would fill them up. He had a friend, Jayananda Prabhu would do we call it the boga run. He would go buy the vegetables for cooking. So he would go to the wholesale vegetable market and fruit market. And there was a man there that had a business of selling fruit, bananas actually, so bananas. He was called Banana King Louie. That was his Banana King Louie. I guess that was the name of his business. So Jayananda Prabhu was friends with him. He was friends with a lot of people like this because they would see him regularly. He was such a friendly person. And then a lot of times these people would donate. In 1975, the company that we would buy flowers from regularly, they donated something like 30,000 carnation heads for the Rath Yatra festival. So they're all over the place. So a lot of that was due to Jayananda Prabhu. And because I was working with him on Rath Yatra, I would go with him to different, he would have to buy something from this place or that place and so on. And so it was nice just to be with him and ride around with him in his truck and see how much people liked him. They'd light up when they see, because he was doing it for years, so he had made a lot of contacts. In fact, there was one lady, later when I was working on Rath Yatra, we had to get a permit from the park, San Francisco Golden Gate Park, to have the parade. And the woman who had to give the permit was not an easy person. She was like some of these bureaucrats you come across in India that like their power and they don't like to let you do things easily. So she was like that. And I remember, in later years,